The Family Feud studio buzzed with its characteristic energy on a humid August afternoon in 2024, the audience settling into their seats with anticipation for another episode of the game show that had entertained American households for generations. Steve Harvey stood at his customary position center stage, his presence radiating the warmth and humor that had made him one of television's most trusted personalities. The Bennett family from Nashville prepared to face the Torres family from Phoenix, both teams displaying the excitement and competitive spirit that accompanied appearing on national television. Among the contestants stood Thomas Bennett, whose outward appearance of friendly competitiveness masked something darker that would soon reveal itself in the most shocking way. What should have been a light-hearted family competition was about to become a disturbing display when paranoia and unfounded accusations exploded onto the stage, forcing Steve Harvey to make an immediate decision to protect an innocent woman from public humiliation and demonstrating that some behaviors could not be tolerated even in the name of entertainment. Before we continue with what happened next, if you value stories about standing up against false accusations and protecting the dignity of innocent people, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share the most powerful moments from Family Feud that remind us about the importance of truth, fairness, and defending those who are wrongly attacked. Thomas Bennett had been married to his wife Angela for 9 years, a relationship that from the outside appeared stable and successful, but that had been deteriorating internally for the past several years due to Thomas's increasing paranoia and controlling behavior. Thomas worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, a detail-oriented profession that suited his personality, but that also fed into his tendencies toward obsessive thinking and rigid patterns. Angela worked as a nurse at a local hospital, a demanding career that required long shifts and irregular hours. They had 2 children together, a 7-year-old daughter named Lily and a 5-year-old son named Noah, both of whom attended elementary school and after-school care programs. Thomas had always been somewhat anxious and prone to worry, traits that Angela had initially found endearing as signs that he cared deeply about their family and their future. However, over time these traits had evolved into something more troubling. Thomas had become increasingly suspicious of Angela's activities outside the home, questioning her about where she went, who she talked to, and why certain tasks took as long as they did. He would call or text her multiple times during her work shifts, becoming upset if she did not respond immediately despite knowing that her job as a nurse often prevented her from checking her phone for hours at a time. The suspicion had escalated significantly about 2 years earlier when Thomas had convinced himself, without any evidence, that Angela was having an affair. He had begun going through her phone when she was sleeping, checking her text messages and call logs for signs of infidelity. He had started showing up unexpectedly at her workplace, claiming he was in the area and wanted to surprise her, but actually checking to see if she was where she said she would be. He had questioned their children about their mother's behavior, asking them leading questions about whether mommy talked to any men or went anywhere unusual. Angela had become aware of Thomas's suspicions and had tried repeatedly to reassure him that she was not cheating, that she loved him and was committed to their marriage, and that his fears were unfounded. She had offered to show him her phone anytime he wanted, to include him in her daily schedule, to introduce him to her coworkers so he could see that her relationships were professional and appropriate. But nothing she did seemed to satisfy Thomas's paranoia. Every reassurance was met with skepticism. Every piece of evidence of her fidelity was dismissed as her being clever about hiding her supposed affair. Thomas had become trapped in a cycle of obsessive thinking where his belief in Angela's infidelity was unfalsifiable, because any evidence to the contrary could be explained away as deception. The situation had taken a toll on their marriage and on Angela's mental health. She felt constantly monitored and judged, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering Thomas's suspicions. She had stopped mentioning male colleagues by name because it would lead to hours of interrogation about who they were and what her relationship with them entailed. She had changed her schedule to work day shifts instead of night shifts because Thomas had become convinced that night shifts provided cover for her supposed affair. She had withdrawn from friendships because Thomas questioned every social interaction as potentially suspicious. Angela had tried to convince Thomas to attend marriage counseling or individual therapy to address his paranoia and trust issues. Thomas had refused, insisting that there was nothing wrong with him and that the problem was Angela's behavior that gave him reason to be suspicious. He would point to minor inconsistencies in her explanations of her day, or to moments when she had forgotten to text him back, as proof that something inappropriate was happening. He had created an entire narrative in his mind about Angela's supposed affair, complete with details about who her affair partner might be and how they conducted their relationship in secret. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged through Angela's workplace, which had been selected to send a team of employees and their families to participate in the show. Angela had been excited about the opportunity, seeing it as a chance for a fun family experience and a brief escape from the tension that had become constant in their home. Thomas had been reluctant initially, uncomfortable with the idea of Angela being in a public setting where she might interact with people outside his observation. However, the invitation had included spouses and children, and Thomas had ultimately agreed to participate, perhaps seeing it as an opportunity to keep Angela under his watch while also maintaining the appearance of being a supportive husband. In the weeks leading up to the taping, the extended family had practiced together, reviewing common Family Feud questions and discussing strategy. Angela had been enthusiastic and engaged, happy to have something positive to focus on. Thomas had participated but had remained somewhat withdrawn and tense, occasionally making comments that suggested he was monitoring Angela's interactions with other family members rather than simply enjoying the preparation process. On the morning of the taping, Thomas had been irritable and suspicious from the moment they left home. He had questioned Angela about what she was wearing, suggesting that her outfit was too attractive and asking who she was trying to impress. During the drive to the studio, he had accused her of being too friendly with the parking attendant when she thanked the man for directing them to a spot. In the green room before filming, Thomas had watched Angela closely as she chatted with other family members and with the production staff, his expression dark and his body language tense. Angela had noticed his mood and had tried to stay close to him, attempting to prevent any incidents by limiting her interactions with others. She had felt the familiar anxiety that came with managing Thomas's paranoia, trying to anticipate what might trigger his suspicions and adjusting her behavior accordingly. The game had proceeded through the initial rounds without major incident. The Bennett family had performed adequately, accumulating points and successfully identifying several answers that appeared on the board. Thomas had been called to the podium multiple times and had provided competent answers, though his demeanor remained tense and his interactions with Steve Harvey had been somewhat stilted and awkward. Then came the moment when everything unraveled. The question appeared on the board and Steve Harvey read it with his usual enthusiasm and energy. Name a reason you might not trust your spouse. It was a question designed to elicit lighthearted answers about eating the last cookie, hiding purchases, or forgetting to do chores. The Bennett family had control of the board, and it was Angela's turn to provide an answer. She stepped up to the podium, visibly nervous not because of the game show pressure, but because she could feel Thomas's eyes on her and could sense his tension even from several feet away. Angela thought for a moment and gave what she hoped would be a safe, generic answer. They are secretive about their phone. The answer appeared on the board as the number 3 response with 21 points. The audience applauded politely, and Angela started to return to her family's position, but then Thomas did something that shocked everyone in the studio. Instead of celebrating the points or moving on with the game, Thomas stepped forward and pointed at Angela, his voice loud and accusatory. "That is exactly what you do. You are always secretive about your phone because you are hiding your affair. This is proof. You just admitted it on national television." The studio fell into stunned silence. This was not playful banter or typical family teasing. This was a serious accusation delivered with genuine anger and conviction. Angela's face had gone pale, her expression showing a mixture of humiliation, hurt, and fear. The other family members looked shocked and uncomfortable, clearly not knowing how to respond to what Thomas had just said. Steve Harvey's expression had transformed from his usual warm humor to serious concern. He held up his hand to signal the production crew, recognizing immediately that what was happening was not appropriate for the show and that intervention was necessary. Thomas continued speaking, seemingly oblivious to or unconcerned about the inappropriateness of the moment. "You think I do not know what you have been doing. You think you have been so clever, but I know about him. I know about all the lies. The whole world is going to know what kind of wife you really are." Angela's voice when she finally spoke was quiet and shaking with emotion. "Thomas, please stop. There is no affair. There has never been an affair. You are doing this in front of everyone. Please just stop." But Thomas was not stopping. His paranoia and anger, which had been building for years, had found an outlet, and he seemed unable or unwilling to contain it. He turned to Steve Harvey as if seeking validation or support. "She has been cheating on me for 2 years. She comes home late from work and says it is because of her shifts, but I know she is meeting someone. She guards her phone like it is gold. She has changed her passwords. She is always texting someone and hiding the screen when I come near." Steve Harvey made an immediate decision. He walked directly up to Thomas, his body language commanding and his expression serious. "Sir, I need you to stop talking right now. This is not appropriate. This is not the place for these accusations. We are going to end this taping immediately." Thomas looked surprised, perhaps expecting Steve to side with him or to sympathize with his position. But Steve continued, his voice firm and clear. "Mom," he gestured to Angela, "you do not have to stand here and be accused of something like this on national television. This is wrong, and we are not going to allow it to continue." Steve turned to address the production crew and the cameras. "We are shutting this down right now. This has gone beyond anything appropriate for this show." He turned back to Thomas, his expression showing both disappointment and concern. "Sir, what you just did was not acceptable. You publicly accused your wife of infidelity without evidence, and in a way that was designed to humiliate her. That is not how you handle relationship issues, and it is not behavior that we are going to facilitate or broadcast." The security team and production staff moved quickly to separate Thomas from Angela and to escort the family off the stage. Angela was crying quietly, her sister putting an arm around her and leading her away from Thomas toward a private area. The children, who had been waiting off stage, were kept away from the scene to protect them from witnessing more of their parents' conflict. Thomas was still trying to justify his outburst, attempting to explain to anyone who would listen that he had proof of Angela's affair and that he was just trying to expose the truth. But the staff were not engaging with his justifications, simply focusing on ending the situation and ensuring everyone's safety. Steve Harvey remained on stage for a moment, addressing the studio audience and the cameras with the gravity the situation demanded. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was a man making serious accusations against his wife without evidence and in the most public and hurtful way possible. This was not a moment of truth or revelation. This was emotional abuse happening in real time. False accusations, public humiliation, and paranoid behavior are forms of abuse, and we are not going to pretend otherwise or allow it to continue on this stage." He continued, his voice filled with conviction. "That woman did nothing wrong by giving an answer to a game show question. Her husband's response of accusing her of infidelity and trying to humiliate her in front of millions of people reveals his own issues, not any wrongdoing on her part. If you are in a relationship where you are constantly accused of things you did not do, where your partner is paranoid and controlling, where you are walking on eggshells to avoid triggering baseless suspicions, that is not love. That is abuse." The audience, which had been silent during the confrontation, began to applaud Steve's words and his handling of the situation. Many people were visibly upset by what they had witnessed, recognizing the cruelty and injustice of what Thomas had done to Angela. In the immediate aftermath, the production team worked to provide support and resources to Angela and to ensure that she and her children would be safe. Angela met with counselors who specialized in emotional abuse and controlling relationships. For the first time, she spoke openly with professionals about the years of paranoia, accusations, and monitoring that she had endured. The counselors helped her understand that what she had been experiencing was indeed a form of abuse, that Thomas's behavior was not normal jealousy or reasonable concern, but rather controlling and emotionally damaging. Angela also met with attorneys to discuss her options regarding her marriage and the protection of her children. The public nature of Thomas's accusations, captured on video by the Family Feud cameras, provided clear documentation of his paranoid and abusive behavior. The attorneys explained that this evidence could be valuable in divorce proceedings and custody arrangements, demonstrating Thomas's instability and his willingness to harm Angela through public humiliation. Angela's family members, who had been present at the taping and witnessed Thomas's behavior, rallied around her with support and validation. Many of them admitted that they had noticed signs of Thomas's controlling behavior over the years, but had not fully understood the extent of what Angela was dealing with. They expressed regret for not intervening sooner and committed to supporting Angela in whatever decisions she made about her marriage and her future. The days and weeks following the incident were emotionally difficult for Angela. She had to process the humiliation of being accused of infidelity on national television, the anger at Thomas for putting her through that experience, and the grief of recognizing that her marriage was irreparably damaged. She also had to navigate the practical challenges of explaining to her young children what had happened in age, appropriate terms, and ensuring they felt safe and loved despite the family crisis. Angela made the decision to separate from Thomas immediately. She moved with her children to stay temporarily with her sister while she figured out longer-term housing arrangements. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting primary custody of the children with supervised visitation for Thomas until he completed therapy and could demonstrate stable behavior. She obtained a restraining order that prevented Thomas from contacting her except through attorneys regarding matters related to the children. Thomas's response to the separation was a mixture of anger and victim mentality. He claimed that Angela was overreacting to what he insisted was justified concern about her fidelity. He accused her of using the Family Feud incident to manipulate public opinion and to turn their families against him. He maintained that he had evidence of her affair, though he never produced any credible proof because none existed. He refused to acknowledge that his behavior had been abusive or that his paranoia was unfounded. 3 months after that August day, Steve Harvey invited Angela to appear on his talk show to discuss what had happened and to address the broader issues of false accusations, paranoid jealousy, and emotional abuse in relationships. Angela agreed, hoping that sharing her story might help others recognize similar patterns in their own relationships and might validate the experiences of people who had been falsely accused or subjected to controlling behavior. When Angela appeared on Steve's show, the transformation from the humiliated, frightened woman on the Family Feud stage was evident. She carried herself with quiet dignity and strength, her voice steady as she spoke about her experience. When Steve asked her to describe what it had been like to be publicly accused of infidelity that she had not committed, Angela's response was both personal and insightful. She explained that the public accusation at Family Feud had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. For years, she had questioned herself, wondering if perhaps Thomas's suspicions were somehow justified by something she was doing wrong. The counseling she had received after the incident had helped her understand that Thomas's paranoia was about his own insecurity and need for control, not about any actual infidelity on her part. Being accused publicly, in front of witnesses and cameras, had made it impossible to continue minimizing or rationalizing his behavior. Steve asked Angela about the years leading up to the Family Feud incident, about how Thomas's paranoia and controlling behavior had affected her daily life. Angela described the constant monitoring, the interrogations about her whereabouts and activities, the way she had gradually isolated herself from friends and colleagues to avoid triggering his suspicions. She talked about the exhaustion of living under constant accusation, of trying to prove her innocence again and again without ever being believed. She explained how Thomas's baseless accusations had eroded her self-esteem and had made her question her own perceptions of reality. She spoke about the impact on their children, who had grown up in an atmosphere of tension and who had witnessed their father's suspicious and controlling behavior toward their mother. She described how she had tried to shield the children from the worst of it, but recognized that they had still been affected by living in a household where their mother was constantly on edge and their father was perpetually angry and mistrustful. Steve asked Angela what she would want to say to others who might be experiencing similar situations, who were being falsely accused by partners, or who were living with someone whose jealousy and paranoia had become controlling and abusive. Angela looked directly at the camera and spoke with conviction born from painful experience. She explained that false accusations were a form of emotional abuse, that being constantly suspected and monitored was damaging even when no physical violence was involved. She emphasized that partners had a right to privacy, to trust, and to be believed when they said they were faithful. She encouraged people who were experiencing paranoid jealousy from partners to recognize that no amount of reassurance or transparency would satisfy someone who was determined to believe in infidelity that did not exist. She urged people in these situations to seek support from counselors, friends, or domestic abuse organizations because emotional abuse was serious and could escalate over time. She also addressed the specific harm of public false accusations. She explained that being accused of infidelity in front of family, friends, or on national television added a layer of humiliation and social damage to the personal harm of the accusation itself. She noted that while she had eventually received support and validation, the initial accusation had left her feeling exposed and judged by people who did not know the full story. She emphasized the importance of bystanders not assuming that accusations were true simply because someone made them confidently or publicly, and the need to protect people who were being falsely accused from additional harm. Steve brought expert guests into the conversation, including a psychologist who specialized in jealousy and paranoia in relationships, and a domestic abuse advocate who could speak to the dynamics of emotional abuse and controlling behavior. The psychologist explained that pathological jealousy was often rooted in the jealous partner's own insecurity, past trauma, or need for control rather than in any actual behavior by the accused partner. She described how jealousy could become delusional when it persisted despite clear evidence to the contrary, and how it could create self-fulfilling prophecies where the accused partner eventually left not because of infidelity, but because the relationship had become intolerable. The domestic abuse advocate provided context about how false accusations and paranoid monitoring fit into broader patterns of coercive control. She explained that abusers often used accusations of infidelity as a way to isolate their partners from support networks, to justify monitoring and controlling behavior, and to keep partners in a defensive position where they were constantly trying to prove their innocence rather than questioning the appropriateness of the abuser's behavior. She discussed the legal and social challenges that victims of false accusations faced, including damage to reputation and the difficulty of proving a negative. The response to Angela's appearance was significant and largely supportive. Thousands of people reached out to share their own experiences of being falsely accused by partners or of living with jealous and controlling spouses. Many expressed gratitude that these issues were being addressed publicly and that someone was naming false accusations as a form of abuse, rather than treating them as understandable concern or reasonable suspicion. Some viewers shared that they had been the jealous or paranoid partner, and that hearing Angela's story and the expert commentary had prompted them to recognize their own behavior as problematic and to seek help. However, some responses were less supportive. A small number of viewers criticized Angela for discussing her private marital issues publicly, or suggested that perhaps there was some basis for Thomas's suspicions even if she denied it. These responses demonstrated the persistence of victim-blaming attitudes and the tendency to side with accusers simply because they made confident claims, regardless of evidence. Steve and Angela addressed these criticisms directly in the show, emphasizing that Angela had not chosen to make her situation public, but had been forced into that position by Thomas's decision to accuse her on national television, and that she was now using that platform to educate others and to advocate for people in similar situations. 6 months after that August day, Angela had made substantial progress in rebuilding her life. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, with Angela maintaining primary custody of the children and Thomas having supervised visitation twice per week. The court had required Thomas to undergo psychological evaluation and to participate in therapy addressing his paranoia and controlling behavior before unsupervised visitation would be considered. The evaluation had revealed that Thomas met criteria for delusional disorder, jealous type, a mental health condition characterized by persistent false beliefs about a partner's infidelity, despite clear evidence to the contrary. The diagnosis had provided some explanation for Thomas's behavior, though it did not excuse the harm he had caused. Angela had moved into her own apartment with her children, creating a home environment that felt safe and peaceful rather than tense and monitored. She had returned to full-time work at the hospital, reconnecting with colleagues, and rebuilding professional relationships that she had withdrawn from during her marriage. She had joined a support group for survivors of emotional abuse, where she found community with others who understood what she had experienced. She had continued individual therapy to process the trauma and to rebuild the self-esteem that had been damaged by years of false accusations and control. Angela's children had also been receiving counseling to help them process the family changes and to address any effects from growing up in a household with unhealthy relationship dynamics. The therapists reported that both children were showing signs of improved emotional well-being now that they were living in a more stable environment. They were learning through age-appropriate discussions that healthy relationships involved trust and respect rather than suspicion and control, helping to prevent them from normalizing the patterns they had witnessed in their parents' marriage. Steve Harvey occasionally reflected on that August day in his later work and interviews. He said it remained one of the most disturbing moments in his hosting career because it had involved witnessing someone weaponize a game show platform to publicly humiliate and falsely accuse their spouse. He talked about how the decision to immediately shut down the taping had been obvious, because allowing Thomas to continue would have made the show complicit in emotional abuse. He emphasized that entertainment should never come at the cost of someone's dignity or safety, and that recognizing when to stop the show was part of his responsibility as a host. The legacy of that day at Family Feud extended into broader conversations about false accusations in relationships, the nature of emotional abuse and controlling behavior, and the responsibility of bystanders and platforms to protect people from public humiliation. Relationship counselors reported that many clients referenced the incident when discussing jealousy and trust issues in their own partnerships. The story became a teaching tool for discussions about the difference between reasonable concerns in relationships and paranoid controlling behavior that constituted abuse. Legal professionals noted the incident as an example of how public false accusations could be documented as evidence of emotional abuse in family court proceedings. Mental health advocates used the story to raise awareness about delusional jealousy and the importance of treatment for mental health conditions that led to harmful behavior toward partners. The incident also prompted discussions about the ethics of reality television and game shows in handling moments when participants' behavior crossed lines from entertainment into abuse or harm. Before we conclude this important story, if you believe that false accusations are serious harm, and that innocent people deserve to be protected from public humiliation and baseless claims, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that defend truth and dignity and that remind us of the importance of evidence and fairness in how we treat one another. Years after that August day, Angela reflected on how one of the worst moments of her life had paradoxically led to her liberation from an abusive relationship that had been slowly destroying her sense of self. The public nature of Thomas's accusations had been humiliating and painful, but it had also made undeniable what she had been trying to deny for years, which was that her marriage was not salvageable and that Thomas's behavior was abusive rather than merely concerning. She often said that if the incident had not happened at Family Feud, she might have continued trying to prove her innocence and fix her marriage for years longer, slowly losing more of herself in the process. Angela had become an advocate for people experiencing false accusations and emotional abuse, speaking at workshops and support groups about her experience and about the importance of recognizing psychological abuse as serious harm deserving of response and protection. She worked with domestic abuse organizations to develop resources specifically addressing false accusations, paranoid jealousy, and coercive control through monitoring and suspicion. She found meaning in using her painful experience to help others recognize similar patterns in their own relationships and to validate that leaving was not only acceptable but necessary when a partner refused to trust despite all evidence and refused to address their own harmful behavior. The story of what happened when Family Feud shut down because a contestant threw wild accusations against his wife became a powerful example of how false accusations were wielded as weapons of control and humiliation, how bystanders and platforms had responsibility to protect people from public harm, and how sometimes the most important thing a show could do was stop being a show and start being a space for intervention and protection. It demonstrated that emotional abuse could be as damaging as physical abuse, that paranoid jealousy and controlling behavior were serious relationship problems that required professional help, and that victims of false accusations deserved belief, support, and validation rather than suspicion or victim blaming. Angela's journey from accused wife living under constant suspicion to independent woman rebuilding her life served as both a warning about the destruction caused by baseless jealousy and an inspiring example of the strength it took to leave an abusive situation and reclaim one's truth. Her message remained consistent over the years, which was that false accusations were never acceptable regardless of how convinced the accuser was of their validity, that demanding excessive transparency and monitoring was controlling rather than caring, that real love involved trust and respect rather than suspicion and surveillance, and that anyone being falsely accused deserved to know that the problem was with their accuser's insecurity or mental health rather than with their own behavior. That is the true story of what happened when a Family Feud contestant threw wild accusations against his innocent wife and Steve Harvey made the immediate decision to shut down the show, demonstrating that some behaviors were too harmful to tolerate even in entertainment contexts, and that protecting people from false accusations and public humiliation was more important than any game or ratings, reminding us all that truth, evidence, and dignity must be defended, especially when someone tries to destroy them through baseless claims made with confidence and malice.